What's up YouTube? Hope you guys are all doing well. So this is a very exciting video. In this one, we hit what is probably the craziest hand I have ever played in my entire time playing poker, and definitely the craziest one broadcasted on this channel so far. Before we do get into this video, I want you guys to check out the link in the description. I've had a few people in my local casino and online ask me what I film with, basically how I prop up my phone, and the answer is a pocket jack. It's a phone holder. It's perfect to prop up on the armrest on the table, or you can put it on the felt itself. Anyways, whether if you want to vlog, watch a movie, etc. at the poker table, or even at like a work desk, a pocket jack is definitely good for you. So be sure to get one in the link in the description. It's definitely a good product. So be sure to check it out. And yeah, anyways, back to the video. Today we're going to be playing 5-10 at Seminole Casino Coconut Creek. Hope you guys enjoy this one. If you haven't already, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you guys down at the felt. Let's go. We go ahead and buy in for $2,500, and we're looking forward to getting involved in some big pots. Within the first orbit, we look down at King Queen offsuit and the cutoff. There's a straddle under the gun, and there's 2 limps to me. I bump it up to $150, and we only see 1 call from the player in the hijack. He has a pretty short stack. He only has $210 behind. So on most flops, we're either just going to be going with it or just completely shutting down. So on a king high flop with his chip stack, there's just absolutely no way that we're ever getting away from this one if he has us beat. Action does start off with him, and he pretty quickly goes all in. Obviously, we're not folding. We toss in a chip for the call, and we're off to see a run out. We're just going to be running it once. The turn comes another king, but it does complete the front door flush, and the river is a jack. So we're sitting here with trips feeling pretty confident, but he does have jack 8 of spades, so he hits the flush on the turn, and we are unable to improve on the river. So we lose a pretty decent sized pot within the first orbit. In this next hand, there's a cutoff limp, and we look down at 7-6 of clubs on the button. We decide to bump it up to $50. The big blind decides to call the $50, and then the cutoff player decides to call as well. So we're going 3 ways to a flop. The flop is pretty good. The flop is 5-7-8 with 2 hearts. So we go ahead and flop middle pair along with an open-ended straight draw. Action does check over to the player in the cutoff, and he decides to throw out $50. Action is now on me, and now it's a question whether we want to be raising now as a semi-bluff or just go into a check calling mode. I think check calling here is maybe the better play. Sure, we might induce the big blind player to tag along with some overcards, but the player in the cutoff, he still is pretty short stacked, so I don't think raising as a bluff is going to fold away any 8, of course, and any flush draw with 2 overs has decent equity against our exact hand. So I decided to just make the call, and this does induce the big blind to tag along as well. So we're still going 3 ways to a turn. The turn is a queen of spades. Obviously not the best card in the world. Action does check over to the player in the cutoff, and he decides to check it over to me this hand. So now's a bit of an interesting spot. I think I could very likely have the best hand here with a pair of 7s, and considering the cutoff player's stack depth, if I bet here and he jams, it's just going to be a pretty miserable spot. So I decide to just pot control and check this one back, and we're off to see a river. Now the river is a absolute dud. The river comes a deuce of clubs, so literally every single draw breaks out. This time the big blind does lead out. She bets $125. The cutoff player pretty quickly folds, so I'm sure he didn't have much of anything, and action is now on me. I think this is a pretty close spot considering the bet size, along with almost, once again, every single draw on the board just absolutely breaking out. We don't have any hearts in our hand, so she could easily have a flush draw. And I don't think she really has a queen here all that often, besides maybe a hand such as 2 overs with a flush draw, such as queen jack suited, queen 10 suited. Knowing this player, I don't think she's ever valuing an 8 here, so it's really just a queen or nothing. So with that being said, I'm sure you guys can guess what I'm going to be doing, which is putting in the call. And yeah, unfortunately for us, she has queen 9, so she flopped a gutter along with an overcard, and she does value a queen on the turn. So one of those weird holdings that if I would have raised the flop, she definitely would have been folding, most likely, and we probably would have been awarded the pot. So unfortunately for us, we make a bad call, and we lose this one. After that last hand, we decide to add on for $300 more, so we're in for $3,100. So definitely not the most ideal start to our session. Hopefully all that can change when we look down at ace-jack offsuit on the big blind. There's 4 limps to me. So now we're sitting with ace-jack on the big blind. I think this is the perfect candidate to squeeze with. So I decided to bump it up to $125. It folds back around to the player in the small blind, and he is the only caller, and once again, this player has an extremely short stack. So we're off to see a flop, which comes down king high. There's 2 hearts on board, and we do have the jack of hearts. When action checks over to me, he literally has less than $100 in his stack. So on a board that favors me slightly more than him, I think I'm just going to be applying the max. So I decided to put them all in for less than $100, and he decides to fold. So a bit of an interesting spot. We happily are awarded the pot with ace high, and yeah, for some reason, I guess we just didn't get it in pre-flop, but I can't complain about this one. Sitting with around $2,600 in our stack when we see a button straddle. Two players call the $25 straddle, and action's now on me in the hijack. I look down at ace king offsuit, so this is definitely a hand that I want to be raising. I bump it up to $175, but unfortunately for us, everyone decides to get out of the way. In this next hand, we look down at ace jack offsuit in the small blind. We see a cutoff open to $40, and we see a call from the player on the button. So in action's now on me, with ace jack offsuit, we could have very likely had the best hand, but since this player opened up from the cutoff, he doesn't really have to have any super strong hands here. So that being said, I think a raise is definitely in order. I decide to bump it up to $200 being out of position. It folds back around to the player in the cutoff, and he decides to fold. And surprisingly, the player on the button, who has been a bit unorthodox this whole session, decides to go all in for around $400. Obviously, a bit of a weird spot, but for this sizing, we're just never folding ace jack here, and we could likely be ahead just considering this exact player type. Even if we're behind, this is one of the players that I don't mind giving action to because he's definitely gotten involved in a lot of pots so far. So, yep, I decided to put in around $200 more, and we're off to see a run out. So obviously not the most ideal run out, but luckily for us, he turns over king jack. So ace jack high is going to be beating king jack high, and we happily are awarded a pretty decent pot. Unfortunately for us, that player is going to be leaving. He provided some pretty good action, but luckily for us, the chips went our way. Now with $3,300 in our stack, we're up $200 on the session. I hope you guys are ready for this next one because this is literally probably the coolest hand that I've put on the channel so far. It folds to me, and I'm on the button with 8-4 suited. And yes, 8-4 suited isn't open on the button. The only customer I have is the big blind, so we're going heads up to a flop. The flop provides us absolutely no help. The flop is queen 10-5 with one spade. So all we really have is some backdoor flush draws and some straight draws. When she checks it over to me, I'm sure 8 high is not good here, so I decided to throw out $25, planning on barreling on any flush card or any straight card, and she does decide to make the call. We're off to see a turn, which is a very good turn. We turn a straight flush draw with the 7 of spades, literally one of the best possible cards we could have asked for. So when she checks over to me, this is a card that I 100% am not going to be shutting down on. We have so much equity, and right now all we have is 8 high. So definitely want to be putting in a bet here. As for bet sizing, I think this is a spot that an overbet makes a lot of sense for one of two reasons. One is we can fold out some hands that are marginally beating us, such as like a 10x or maybe even some queen x. I don't think any straight draws are going to continue on an overbet, and if we do get called and we do brick the river, it's pretty safe to assume that she does have a strong hand, so she'll be calling off on a lot of runouts. So with that being said, once again, I think an overbet is definitely the best play here. I decided to throw out $150. There is a lot of rivers that I'm going to be shutting down on, but let's hope that we do not get one of those. Praying that we can complete our straight or our flush, but why don't we just complete both of them? The river is a 6 of spades. Are you kidding me? We literally back ourselves into a straight flush. The most disguised straight flush imagine, like, it's literally crazy. Action does start off on the small blind player. And what in the world? If this hand couldn't get any better, she decides to lead out for $300. What the heck is going on? We're sitting here with the absolute nutter butters. We're not losing. What in the world is going on? I look over at her chip stack, and she definitely has some more chips to be played with. With around $1,000 behind after the $300 bet, I think there's only one bet here that makes a lot of sense, and that is all in. Even though it is a pretty big overbet, the reason being is if she's leading on the river for this sizing, she only has one of two hands. She only has a really strong hand that's going to be calling off a large bet, or she has nothing. So if she has nothing, she's not calling a raise regardless. And if she has a super strong hand, why not just go for the max? So I decide to go all in. Before I could even finish my sentence, she pretty quickly announces call. And obviously, we're going to be winning this one. She quickly tables queen 10, so she had us absolutely smoked on the flop. But luckily for us, we hit the most nutty, disgusting run out I could have ever imagined. And luckily at Seminole Casino Coconut Creek, we also hit a high hand. So that is going to be a few extra hundred in our pocket. But this is by far one of the most nutty hands I have ever played, and we get the absolute maximum. We're pretty card dead after the straight flush hand until we go ahead and look down at King Queen of Hearts in the cutoff. There's a limp to me, and I decide to open up the action to $50. The player on my left who's on the button, he decides to put in the 3-bet. He bumps it up to $225. He's a regular here at the Creek, and truthfully, he's probably one of the best players, if not the best player that plays here on a regular basis. So I know that he can be doing this lightly. Action doesn't get too far after he puts in the 3-bet because the player in the small blind, who's my friend, who's also a very good player, he decides to put in the 4-bet. He decides to bump it up to $600. It folds back around to me, and all three of us have a lot of experience with each other. So as silly as this sounds, the player in the small blind doesn't have to have a nutted hand here. He's thinking this. He's thinking, since I'm in the cutoff, I could have a pretty wide range. The player on the button knows that I could have a wide range, so he puts in a raise, making it a perfect squeeze opportunity. Regardless, I'm definitely not going to be flat calling $600 here, so I can do one of two things. One thing I can do is put them all in for his remaining around $2,000, but I think that might be a little bit too ambitious, and even though the ranges are relatively wide, it doesn't mean that he can't have a strong hand, and I think it just comes down to us finding a better spot. So that being said, I decided to just let this one go, and unfortunately for us, the player on the button decides to fold as well. Our friend, he decides to show us Queen Jack suited, so our read on the situation was actually correct. I still think that we could have found a better spot, because I think more likely than not, he is going to arrive with a hand that, even though it might be a semi-bluff, it will have really good equity against King Queen, or have us absolutely dominated. This is just one of the few hands that we had absolutely smoked. In this next hand, we see our friend from earlier position open up to $35. A player in middle position called the $35, and we look down at Queen 8 offsuit on the button. This is a spot that I think I should be folding most of the time, but this time I decide to call and we're off to see a flop. The flop is extremely dry. The flop comes out Queen 3-3 rainbow, so we go ahead and flop top pair. I'm going to be checking this board 100% of the time. And my friend in early position, he actually decides to slow down and check this one as well. The player in middle position, he throws out $50. I'm not going to be flopping top pair and folding, so I decide to make the call. And now action's back on the early position player, who puts in the $50 as well. So we're off to see a turn. The turn is a really good card for our exact hand. The turn is an 8. So now we're beating any other queen, but we still are losing to overpairs such as aces and kings that the early position player may have. And then also, obviously, a 3. Action goes ahead and checks over to the middle position player once again, and he continues to bet. He decides to put out $250. I don't think that I can improve on this turn and be folding. Even though he is sizing up, I don't think he ever has too many 3s here. So I decide to make the call, and action's down the player in the early position, and he tanks for a long time and decides to fold. So I think he had a real decision to be made here. I think he might have had a queen himself. So now we're going heads up to a river, which is an absolute dud. It comes a 5. When action starts off with me, this is a spot that I think I can be leading a lot of the time. I think that if I check it over to him and he bets massive, I can get away from it sometimes. But I think if we lead and he decides to raise, it will just simply make our decision easier. So with a blocker sized bet, we can also get value from maybe some worse queens, such as king queen, maybe even ace queen, queen jack, etc. So I decide to throw out $350. He doesn't think for too long and does decide to make the call. We table our hand, and unfortunately for us, he tables 2-3 of diamonds. So I think post-flop, I played this hand fine, but I think it just comes back to potentially folding pre-flop, or maybe doing a smaller size bet on the river. But regardless, we could have checked it over to him, he could have bet a lot bigger, and we might have had to pay it off. So I don't hate the line, I just think it's might be a cooler at the end of the day. In this next hand, we look down at 8-10 offsuit in the hijack. The player in the cutoff actually folds prematurely, so now we're in a bit of a weird spot. I decide to open it up though. I decide to open it up to $30. We do see a call from the player in the button, and then the player in the big blind decides to tag along as well. So we're going to be going 3 ways to a flop. The flop comes out Queen 7-6, so we go ahead and flop a gutter. Action goes ahead and checks over to me, and I decided to throw out a half pot size bet of $75, and we only see a call from the player on the button. We're off to see a turn, which comes a 10. So now we have a middle pair and definitely some showdown value. When action starts off with me, with our pair and our gutter, I think I can definitely be checking here. But if we bet, we can still get value from a few hands. If he has 2 clubs, he's not going to be folding. If he has a flush plus a straight draw, he's not going to be folding. And maybe even like a 7 plus a flush draw, he's not going to be folding. Sure, he could have a queen here, but I think I just want to be setting my own price. So I decided to throw out $150, planning on checking a lot of rivers besides a 10, an 8, or a 9. He decides to call the 150, so now we're off to see one more card. The river is a 7 of diamonds, so definitely a better card for him than it is for me. This time I do decide to check it, and he grudgingly checks it back. I table my pair of 10s, feeling confident some of the time, and luckily for us, he shows 8, 5 of clubs. So he flops open-ended and turned a flush draw. So luckily for us, thin value on the turn definitely got us paid the maximum with a pretty marginal hand. So that was the last hand of the night. I hope you guys enjoyed the session, and now time to rack up and go hit the cage. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. We were in the game for $3,100, and we ended up cashing out for $4,150. So we made $1,050 in around 4 hours of play. Definitely will take it. Once again, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you haven't already, it'd mean the world if you hit the thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.